Hi, everybody. I'm sorry to interrupt your discussion over lunch. I hope the discussion at your table was as interesting as the discussion was at our table. Once again, my name is Andrew Graham. I'm immediate past president of the Canadian Club of Toronto and really pleased to be your host for today's discussion. Thank you for joining us, whether you're here in person, like all of you, or online via our webcast. Over our long and proud history, the Canadian Club of Toronto has had the good fortune of benefiting from lots of generosity of sponsors ourselves. And quite frankly, it would be a challenge to offer the caliber and range of events without support. So we definitely get the importance of philanthropy. This is a reality for clubs, charities, not-for-profit organizations across the country. It's hard to imagine the new wing of a hospital or a new academic building or renovations to a community art space or recreation space happening without philanthropy. Fundraising and development are critical to the growth and prosperity of our communities and beyond, and we are so pleased to be able to host this important conversation today. Now, I want to ask your help with one thing. We were wondering over the course of lunch, how many people here, maybe you can put your hand up, is it your job, or do you work in development? Is this related to what you do? So a lot of people. So for everyone else, you're going to be asked for a donation later on by someone at your table. A recent Fraser Institute study showed that we are not giving to charities like we used to. Donations have hit a 20-year low, according to the study. Though on the other hand, we are going to hear today how there has been a trend towards noticeably larger, or at least some noticeably larger donations as well. So those two realities, I think, are going to be part of the conversation. Fundraising there's no doubt it's a competitive space to attract the big gifts and the big asks, and it's not for the faint of heart. Our panelists bring deep experience, skills, and successes, and we're going to hear from them shortly. Let me introduce them. First of all, Marilyn Brown. Marilyn joins us with over 20 years of experience in the charitable sector. She has led high-performing teams at Kids Help Phone, Canadian Cancer Society, and Mount Sinai Hospital. She has been Vice President of Philanthropy for the ROM Governors since September, and is the VP of VP Marketing and Membership of the Board of the Association of Fundraising Professionals of Greater Toronto. She is a passionate musician, playing in and supporting many music-based organizations. Kevin Goldthorpe. Kevin has been President and Chief Development Officer at SickKids Foundation since October 2016. He oversees the execution of the $1.3 billion SickKids versus Limits campaign. I'm sure we've all seen that campaign all over the place. Kevin, I meant it in a positive way, but it's good to inject a bit of controversy right at the beginning. Kevin has a strong track record of managing successful, high-profile fundraising campaigns within the academic and healthcare sectors. As a senior leader at Sinai Health Foundation and Sinai Health Systems, he was instrumental in raising an unprecedented $250 million for the campaign to renew Sinai, the largest campaign in Mount Sinai's history. David Palmer. Since 2007, David has served as Vice President Advancement for the University of Toronto. Under his leadership, U of T publicly launched the Boundless campaign with a $2 billion goal. In December 2018, Boundless concluded as the largest campaign in Canadian history with $2.64 billion raised. David is a senior fellow of Massey College, a trustee of the Council for Advancement and Support of Education, CASE, and an executive committee member of the National Council of Foundation Executives. So we really do have a real heavyweight panel with us today. Moderating today's panel is Valerie Pringle. She is one of Canada's best-known and most respected broadcasters, public figures, and volunteers. She was appointed as a member of the Order of Canada in 2006 for her contributions to communications and her volunteer work. Valerie and panelists, I'm pleased to turn the club podium over to you all.
Thank you kindly. Is the mic working? Hello, hello. As my dad would say, you don't need a mic. Vaccinated with a gramophone, I think was his line. Anyway, it does look like an AFRPS lunch or whatever here today. And I'm sorry you couldn't get tickets to Obama. But we're really, really happy to see you here, and we've got a great panel, as has just been pointed out. And as was mentioned, I should just say, I was a broadcaster and a journalist. But really, for the last 15 years, I've been a fundraiser, a volunteer. So this topic is of enormous interest to me, too, because this is the world that I inhabit, mostly for Trans-Canada Trail, where I chair that foundation, greatest project in the history of the world, and with the Center for Addiction and Mental Health as a volunteer board member there. So I'm looking at that very much through this lens, and I'm totally interested in, embedded in this topic. So first of all, I mean, it does seem to people who are looking in the pages of the paper and seeing huge announcements. There were $400 million gifts announced in 2019, which is unprecedented, mainly to hospitals, or to hospitals and universities. So what does this tell us? Why is this happening? What's going on? David.
Well, first I want to say, on behalf of Kevin and Marilyn, myself, something we chatted about earlier, the real heroes of this conversation are the donors, and we want to be very, very clear that any learnings that we've had as professionals really come from the experience of working with extraordinary people. To your question, in terms of why this is happening, four things come to mind for me. One is donors, professionals in this room will all know this, donors give to create change, but they give very large gifts to create change at scale. And I think this is one of the most important things we need to understand as fundraisers. What is the essential mission or cause that's driving that donor? It's often not our institution. Our institution exists in a very competitive landscape, but that cause is what's driving the big philanthropy. So that cause might be peace and justice in the Middle East. It might be defeating heart failure over the lifespan. But it's our job to see if we can place our institution as the necessary and singular vehicle to address that cause. And that becomes a competitive reality of why these gifts are made. If I could just add a couple of other thoughts. I think we'll all agree that the necessary element in driving these large gifts is an idea, a very big idea, an idea for impact at scale. And I think this is always the answer to the question as to why this happened and why us and why not someone else. Often it's the caliber of the idea that's brought forward that really inspires transformational philanthropy. But it's also the resonance of that idea, I think, and this is the last point I'll make. I believe that every large gift like this has a deeply personal story at the heart of it. And it's our job to find that resonance with what is that donor story, what brought that donor in front of us, what brought that donor to this point where that donor's having that conversation, and what is the resonance between that story, that narrative of that donor, and the narrative of the idea, the gift that you're presenting to them. There's a fundamental equation there, and that is, how can my gift to your institution help me help my cause? And if we can address all four parts of that equation, then we have that deep personal resonance, which I believe is at the heart of all of this transformational philanthropy.
So, for example, and I'll just quickly get Kevin here, Peter Gilgan, $100 million to SickKids. How do you get that resonance?
Thanks, Valerie, and thank you all. Certainly, first would echo David's notes. Like we're not experts. We're people who have had some wisdom and experience, and if you stop learning, you stop being open, you'll never ever be discussing these things. Second is for a transformational gift, whether it's Gilgan or Schwartz-Reisman or any other large $100 million donor. It doesn't have to be $100 million, a discussion beforehand. It's like it's relative transformation. What's transformational to your institution? Because a much smaller institution than the University of Toronto, alma mater, could be something that is truly transformational in scope and size to them and less than 7 figures. So let's think about relative size, relative impact. For Gilgan, and I'll talk about very few people publicly because it's not only our stories to tell, it's our donors' stories to tell. But Peter was very public about this, so we can say that it's actually an incredible story of someone who publicly put up his hand, or he actually was a volunteer for us, in a session to think about who could support then our research tower over a decade ago. And he put up his hand, very Peter-like, and said, "Why am I not on this list? Something's wrong." And hence began the first gift, and it was a $40 million gift to help support our Peter Gilgan Center for Research and Learning. What was incredible then, in terms of the vision and the big idea, is that Peter, through that process, was engaged in the idea of discovery and of learning and how you drive forward better child health. Roll forward to a year and a half ago with the 5th anniversary of the Gilpin Center opening. And Peter had been this is all public, Peter had been very clear, look, I'm great, I will help you, but this is not for me, we're doing other things, my foundation has other objectives. And it was incredible because as he sat through our 5-year celebration, that was strictly celebration, he then got up to respond to the research scientists he'd become very engaged with. And he started thanking them, and he said, you know, I think if I could do this all over again, I would. And hence began the journey that led to this latest gift. And so it really was about this notion of vision and the problem we were trying to solve coming together. How do you make child health better for Torontonians, Greater Toronto Area, Ontario, Canada, and how he could play a role in solving that problem. So Peter drove that entire process, entire timeline, and it was we were there enabling his vision to come to pass.
Marilyn, is it, people might say, are we catching up to the U.S.? Generally, more philanthropic, always bigger gifts.
Canada's an incredibly philanthropic country. I think we punch well above our weight in many things, on philanthropy in particular. We don't have the population sizes of the US, obviously. We're the same population as California. So the wealth that's in this country is not as mass as the US, but those that can give in Canada do. And when you look at the research studies that say, the highest per capita giving in Canada comes from Newfoundland, we're not talking about largest gifts. We're talking about the act of actually donating, and how are you going to take the money that you have and donate. So it's pretty remarkable. And when it comes to these $100 million gifts, it has to do with the ideas. So to your point, we have a wonderful gentleman on our board who says, I've got more money than you have ideas, right? Like, I need ideas. What are the ideas? Not the institution, not a particular project, but what's the game-changing element of this? What are we going to do? I think the more that charities can envision that, and to your point, Kevin, it's not about $100 million. There's, yes, 85,000 charities in Canada, but 54% of them are, have no professional fundraiser on staff. So it's really, how do you get strategic for your organization on what could be, and then how do you articulate it to your donor as a solution to what they're trying to achieve.
Well, one of the great stories that involved Aram was Michael Lee Chin's gift.
Yep.
And, the solicitation from Hillary Weston.
Correct.
Yeah.
So here's a woman who is a remarkable volunteer and champion for the province, for the museum. And this is a donation that she could have made herself. And Michael asked her, the story is that Michael asked her, why don't you do it? And she said, I could, but if you did it, it would mean so much more. It would mean so much more coming from an immigrant to Canada, making this kind of just iconic project happen in the city. And in hindsight, look at what the Crystal has done for Toronto. You can't see a postcard of Toronto without the front of the museum on it now. And the statement that it made with this gift coming from Michael Lee Chin isn't so much about the why, but what is the impact of my stepping up going to have for this institution, for philanthropy. It truly was groundbreaking that he made this gift.
Yeah, no, I was going to just briefly, because I think a lot of people are aware of one of the $100 million gifts last year was to CAMH, the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, from Anonymous. And it's such a great story. I was asking again how it happened. And this is a person who went on the CAMH website, I think had heard the president speak, was impressed, clicked the Contact Me button, and said, I'd like to talk about making a gift. Now, you can imagine if that went to the wrong person. Oh, yeah, $50 sounds good, whatever. Anyway, it went to the brilliant Ann Symington, who works at CAMH, and it was over weeks. You know, this was a donor, as you say, inspired, wanted to, had a vision, and, you know, over weeks, and then ultimately a couple of months, it was $100 million. So, you know, nothing like a motivated person. I'm wondering, you know, again, unless there's a story that you want to tell, what happens if the big gifts come to the little donors? You go, like, what's the point of my $5 a month pledge if if people are giving $50 million?
Well, from our perspective, when you look at the cumulative effect of those $50 pledges, they amount to an equivalent amount of impact on these charities. So, when we did the Boundless campaign, we had over 104,000 unique donors. I know Kevin at SickKids, their current campaign is numbering somewhere north of 700,000 or 800,000 unique donors. These donors are making a huge difference to their community. So you might say to yourself, are these very large gifts taking anything away from these smaller charities rather? Are they really just serving a small sliver of the elite? But all you have to do is look at the mandate of these institutions like SickKids, like the ROM, and like the University of Toronto, and the tremendous breadth of their constituencies and whom they serve. They serve every single aspect of society, from the most disadvantaged, the most underserved, to those who have the means to afford to go to university, to attend museums, to seek treatments. This is a tremendous constituency that reflects the enormous diversity of the city and every segment in it. So these gifts actually, these very large gifts actually benefit all aspects of society. And in particular, I would say, those who are most in need in our society, whether they're seeking education or seeking treatment, or they're seeking knowledge of other cultures. I think that part of society is probably the ones that have the biggest impact for these large gifts. For the small charities, though, I would say that this is genuinely a business in which a rising tide lifts all boats. We certainly saw this at the University of Toronto during the Great Minds campaign, the first billion-dollar campaign in the country.
We wondered if that was going to be like some big guy jumps in the pool and just empties it. You go, oh, great. They took all the money. They vacuumed it all up. $1 billion, what are they thinking? There's going to be nothing left.
Exactly. And yet what we found is that charities across the country of all sizes saw giving increase, not just as a result of that, but with every institution that reaches beyond their grasp, they're lifting sites broadly. And so we see small, medium, and large charities continuing to gain, new donors gain dollars in the door to serve their missions. And I think that every single one of these gifts has an impact that does lift these sites.
And Valerie, I would add to what David said by observing that there are really two different things we're talking about. One on the large dollar value gifts, which are coming as people are inspired by the thinking big. So as a country, as a society, culture, we are thinking big and seeing that big thinking is shifting away from government back to the individual, becoming more American-like, back to the individuals and families. At the same time, that concentration of wealth is increasingly shifting to a smaller percentage of the population. So there are more people who then are thinking that it is their responsibility now, not government, because government can't and won't think on these big ideas and drive fundamental change, and are stepping up incredibly. And that's what we're seeing in our sector, and it's why it's so incredible to work.
And people are aware, because the Canadian way was always like government will take care of us. That you're seeing that's changed,
and that
you're
is,
hearing
that
that
is
from your
shifting.
donors.
There's still surprising conversations one has to dissuade the idea that government's paying for everything. The flip side of it that David mentioned that we track at SickKids and talk about more than dollars is in fact the number of donors. And so every single morning we get our dollar value in campaign to date, but we all now, every single staff person first looks at the number of donors. This morning we're at 848,711 distinct donors who've made a gift to SickKids. And why is that important beyond that's a nice big number? Way to go. I think it's important because for us, it emulates what happened when the last SickKids was rebuilt in the late 40s, early 50s. When the hospital opened, some 78,000 people stood in line to go through and tour the new hospital. Think about that number in proportion to the number of Torontonians. Roll forward to a GTA of 7 million people serviced by this tertiary quaternary hospital. It is sort of that modern day view of this is something that people care deeply about, and it's the opposite of those big gifts where I can do something transformational. What's happening is you're saying I can be part of a movement. I can be part of a movement of people who are putting in what I can, what's important to me or transformational to me, and achieve something with my $10 a month.
Well, and you were very bold with your marketing campaign that absolutely spoke to that idea of a movement, and I guess appealing more to male donors, which was something that you were trying to do as well.
Distinctly adding male and younger donors. The success of the Versus brand campaign has been that we have attracted for more people, but shifted our average donor base slightly younger and slightly more balanced between male and female donors.
So, but there must have been people who looked at that and went, oh, this is sort of aggressive, I don't know. It's not sweet kids and teddy bears, you know.
But this is an aggressive idea. The whole point about this is, you know, we could talk about physics, we could talk about poison arts and culture. We're not just operating business as usual. We're talking about aggressively building a multi-billion-dollar new facility that's handling the most ill kids certainly in the country, and in some cases the world.
And that speaks to the importance of having a $100 million donor, a $250 million donor. When you have vision, in order to accelerate that vision into reality, you have to have these partners and these leadership donors that will step up. Like, I'm one of the smaller donors, and so when I think about it, that for me, to your point, really indicates your relevance. If you have a broad base of donors, that's solidifying the why of your cause, and that you are relevant, you have community backing, and so on. And for me, it's a value statement. Everywhere I donate, it's because I care about that, and I'm putting my hand up to say I care about this issue. But in order to really put the gas in the engine, you need these fantastic donors who have the capacity, wish to help. I was reading 96% of donors are truly motivated by this desire to help those in need. And so it really does stem from that place, not from recognition, not anymore. Maybe 25, 30 years ago, recognition was a big deal, but not anymore.
I see a lot of big names on big buildings, so recognition still matters, obviously.
Still matters, but it's not like people were shopping around for law faculties, 25, 30 years ago to put their name on, so that has changed. But it really comes from a place of, I want to help, and you have the ability for me to help.
You asked about branding and marketing campaigns, and SickKids campaign is just extraordinarily effective at telling its story and the importance of the work that it does. And I think this is something that has been a fundamental change in philanthropy and in charitable organizations over the last 10 or 15 years. We're taking this notion of branding and marketing much more seriously, and our ability to tell our story is, again, fundamental to our mission and to our ability to attract constituents. So I think in the case of the university, we had a branding campaign around our campaign, which was called Boundless. And there, what we sought to do is to establish a theme for this campaign that talked about the tremendous impact of students at a watershed moment of personal change and discovery in their lives, who are, to a person, seeking to reach beyond their grasp to have an impact in the world. We thought about faculty doing life-changing research on topics as far afield as the origins of the cosmos to the origins of cancer. We thought about alumni for the university, over 600,000 alumni in 190 plus countries around the world. This is an enormous global footprint that's carrying forward Canada's voice, Canada's values, Canada's perspectives in international settings. And we thought about the challenges that beset the world today and how the solutions to those challenges truly are boundless. They defy disciplines, they defy approaches, they defy nationalities and boundaries. That resonance of that concept of boundlessness, whenever we expose that to a broad alumni audience, a broad student audience, or a donor audience, they saw that in a deeply personal sense. In other words, the University of Toronto, very big place, could be seen as impersonal. But instead, what they saw was the values of the institution resonate deeply with my values, and then giving results.
You have a great story about Michael Bloomberg.
Well, you asked earlier about small gifts, and interestingly, this week I was in a session, some of my colleagues were in this session as well. Some of you heard Mark Weinstein, the Vice President of Advancement at McGill, talk about the John McCall McBain gift. And he said something that is very similar to what I've heard my colleague, my friend Fritz Schrader at Johns Hopkins University say about the $1.3 billion gift that Mike Bloomberg gave Johns Hopkins. And in fact, I brought the picture, which I didn't bring up here, and we didn't have a screen, so I couldn't show it. But it's the gift card for Michael Bloomberg from the 1960s. This is their database. It's a card, an index card that goes in a drawer alphabetically, and in it is written his gifts to the university, written by hand. 1964, graduating gift, $5. 1965, $5. 1966, annual fund gift, $5. 1967, $10. Every single year by 1970, $20. John McCall McBain graduated from McGill in 1994. Many of you know he made a $200 million gift to McGill earlier this year. His equivalent gift card, I don't know whether it was paper or electronic by 1984, graduating gift, $20. This sustained history of engagement is often, but not always, a common factor in the largest philanthropists, the largest philanthropy that we see happen in these institutions. And it shows you the power of a gift that's made early in one's life, which establishes a pattern of giving, but also establishes a relationship.
Yeah. One of the questions that's come up is, how has social media changed the way you collect or campaign for donations? You know, the stat I have, at least on the GoFundMe stuff, which is huge and widespread, is that they now handle $200 million in donations a year, which is not going into the regular funds. So what's the answer to that? I mean, in every way, or in some ways, or in small ways? Yes. Kevin, do you want to start?
Sure. We say with all seriousness that we must become a technology company that fundraises, that all charities must become technology companies that fundraise, not think differently. So our fastest area of growth in the past few months has actually been online giving or various forms of social media driving that electronic conversion to gifts. So for us, it's very much part of where you must be and must experiment. We've done some things well, and we've done some things that haven't worked well. We have certainly experimenting with different kinds of gifts coming this way, different messaging. What we know is that we must be doing it. All of us must be doing it. Our mass donors want to be communicated with in a different manner. They want to access information when they want to access it, and then make a gift decision easily when they want to do it. So we must change our business in all ways to support that.
There's a lot of technology that is used in the commercial sector. You know, I know if I talk about prom dresses with my daughter, suddenly my social media feed is filled with ads from dress companies. They're always listening. Exactly, and so if charities were to behave like these businesses, we would know an awful lot more about our donors. We would be able to target them far more specifically and offer them these value propositions that charities do to get them engaged. However, the last stat that I saw was only 7% of fundraising revenue in Canada was from online donations. So no one's making a $100 million gift online, though the CAMH story
Anon was good. Contact me.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Totally unreal. But that's just not how it works over years of engagement and so on. But it's a really quick way to have hand raisers. People, go and explore, and if you're feeding them a very easy way to give, they'll respond. It's about simplicity and convenience when you're using that. So there's data and technology versus just the actual functionality. There are some charities that are entirely digital. The only way you can give to them is digitally, and that's just in response to their audience and what the opportunity is.
Mm-hmm. Well, another question's come in. We addressed government just slightly because, as I say, it's been sort of a Canadian attitude that government will basically run our universities and our hospitals and, a museum. Here's the question: how do you process these efforts change as new governments come in at all three levels? As they're elected, do you have to we all do. Oh, who do you know? But
well, there's certainly a huge impact that governments can have on us in changes of public policy. I think in each case, whether it's municipal, provincial, or federal, when governments change, it's incumbent upon us to make sure that those who've been in opposition, if it's a change of government, already have a wide exposure to the value, in our case, of higher education. It's important in driving economic prosperity for the country, so that when they do take power, they have that appreciation, and they might be willing to open an ear to the changes that are needed in the sector in order to increase that competitiveness, that leadership, that economic drive. So it's really quite incumbent upon us to build those relationships in much the same way that we build a donor relationship, through consistent communication, through presenting a viable case, a case for support, a rationale around an idea that governments can feel serve the interests of the people while advancing major themes to which they're committed. And I would say that we also have to look very carefully behind the scenes, behind the, let's say, under the engine hood of changes to public policy that affect our institutions, because often the implications of public policy are very, very short term, and the long-term effects are not really well thought through. And that can have both positive and negative effects on our institutions' ability to fulfill our mandates.
Yeah, I would agree. At the Royal Ontario Museum, we are an Ontario government agency, and part of that challenge in building the relationships is when we've had 3 ministers of culture. Even the whole portfolio has changed name over a 2-year period. Is how do you keep advocating? Now, luckily, the museum's full of people that love to talk about what we do, and we love having people there to show them what we do. But it does present a challenge when you're reliant on that funding for keeping doors open and the public having access.
No, it's interesting because I got called by just a friend who works on a board at Trees Ontario, for example. And they'd always just been funded by the government. They plant trees, they do good, and all of a sudden, no budget or cut hugely. And faced with, how do we fundraise? Now what do we do? And how, do we even start that process? So it is really tricky for organizations that have been used to that kind of support when they lose it.
I would add, Valerie, that we can't not acknowledge the important role that government does play. Certainly in education, there's been a major change of who funds what. In culture, different. In healthcare, government still is the largest funder, the dominant funder of healthcare dollars to fund the operations of hospitals, and we as Canadians enjoy incredible healthcare. The role of philanthropy then, and what the donor-government interaction becomes, and back to the topic of transformational gifts, is what intersection do we have as partnerships between government and philanthropy in ways like capital projects, like building a new SickKids, where government's providing 2/3, 3/4 of the funding required for a building, and the community, aka our donor base, is funding the other 1/4 to 1/3. Important role and relationship that exists, through to using philanthropy to pilot innovation, which is really one of the major roles that you see a foundation or philanthropy play, where government explicitly acknowledges that we are able to generate from donors the idea of a new technology. Will this work? And we use philanthropy to drive a pilot, to show innovation, show efficacy and efficiency, and then give the evidence to government so they can change the way it funds and delivers healthcare. That's a very valuable partnership we can't forget.
Here's another question. There are numerous significant campaigns underway. Are we challenged by emptying the swimming pool analogy? Are we challenged by the giving capacity in the GTA? I mean, when you guys look at that, when you're given, just a couple of $1 billion campaign, woo, is it there? Are there enough people to support that? How do you reach communities that haven't traditionally given? Sometimes the announcement in the paper will be a name, and I think, I've never heard of that person. How did they find them? Where did they come from? Who's got all that money?
Well, I'd say that I imagine if we pulled this room right now, the collective response would be we've barely scratched the capacity for philanthropy in this community and in this country. There's just an enormous amount of new wealth that's being generated through the industry of individuals, creative, energetic, driving individuals, creating value around them in a new enterprise. Diversification, I think, is critically important. The example you used of the charity that plants trees, having a single source of your funding is a huge risk. So diversifying that base is critically important, and that includes involving all of the dynamic and diverse communities of Toronto. I know it's certainly something that charities, including ours, are paying increasing attention to. When we look at our students, University of Toronto, and we ask our first-year students, 79% of them say that they are members of a visible minority. 79%. When we look at our young alumni, we see an equal diversity. Do we see that diversity in our donor pool? That is something we have to think really hard about. It's clearly, look at what's happening in Toronto. Toronto, of course, is the Toronto region, the GTA region, is home to an outsized portion of immigration into this country. More than 20% of our students come from, close to 50% of our students come from households with earnings of $50,000 or less. But more than 20% may be the first in their family ever to go to university. Clearly, immigrants that are coming to this country are finding economic opportunity, life opportunity in higher education. Our efforts in philanthropy have to support that in a very significant way.
Either of you?
Agreed. There's so much potential in this country, in this city, for more donations from people that we don't know. We all have the common lists. We all have the common people we know of. It's who we don't know. And we talked earlier about the role and power of volunteers. One of the ways we can achieve greater results and sort of scratch below the surface is working with a more diverse group of volunteers who have more diverse networks. Can introduce a hidden wealth, the new wealth that's been generated, the businesses we know that exist and we simply don't know as common names, but they're generating very successful wealth and tackling those new potential donors.
If I could just add one comment on that, which might seem a little self-serving, and I apologize in advance.
Oh, you've been self-serving the whole time.
Yeah.
Be boundless.
Well, I was just going to say to Marilyn, if, for your donor that has more money than you have ideas, we have a few spare.
It's okay, we're working on them.
I was going to say,
I got a lot of ideas.
I was going to actually, a somber note. I don't think we've ever seen a response at the University of Toronto more rapid than the response we've seen since we announced the creation of our Iranian Student Memorial Scholarship to acknowledge the 6 students at the University of Toronto who died in the crash 2 weeks ago. And that, again, is bringing a whole community to the fore of Canadian Iranians, but also international Iranians, who are suddenly looking at Canada as the kind of place where they can find a home and thrive. And again, I think our efforts to reach out to such communities, they have consequences beyond anything I think we can anticipate.
Well, I think that's a perfect ending, from 100 million to, this widespread response that is so visceral and so emotional and so empathetic, and leading into where, the new world will go for Canadian philanthropy. Anyway, there are lots of good questions. Sorry, I didn't get to all of them, but I'll get you back to work on time. So there you go. That's the trade-off. Anyway, thank you all so much for your thoughts and expertise and for all you do, because you do make the city so much a better place.
Thank you so much.
Well, I thought that was really a terrific and inspiring discussion. Thank you to all 4 of you for leading it. Maybe a bit more formally, on behalf of the Canadian Club of Toronto and everyone in this room, I'd like to thank Marilyn, Kevin, David, and Valerie for bringing your thoughts and wisdom both to the stage today and to everything you do in what you do at work. It's very, very important for the city and for the country. And I thought having the examples was really powerful, and I know, Valerie, that was something that you wanted to emphasize. I think it worked really well. So I thought it was really inspiring to hear about how some individual gifts can come about and how someone who's a $5 donor today, that can turn into something much bigger as time progresses. So I just want to wish you continued success in your roles and in your organizations and in the campaigns that are to come. So just maybe one last time, thank you very much. I also want to thank MediaEvents.ca, Canada's online event space, and VVC for live streaming today's event. And finally, thank you to all of you for joining us. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Have a great afternoon.